It is said there are doors in this world that were never meant to be opened, only approached in silence. At the far edge of forgetting, where the ground grows cool and the air holds its breath, a stone threshold rests in half-light. Its surface is worn smooth, not by footsteps alone, but by centuries of quiet passing, dust settling, breath lingering, time brushing past without insistence. No inscription announces its purpose. No warning declares danger. And yet, something in the stillness tells us to slow our thoughts before drawing closer. Whispers tell us this door was sealed before memory learned its name. There is no record of who placed the final stone. No song that recalls the moment it was closed. Only a question remains, whispered rather than asked. Who sealed this door? And what moment were they trying to preserve? Beyond the threshold, the earth opens gently, not like a wound, but like an invitation. The passage descends in a gradual curve, shaped by careful hands. There are no torches mounted along the walls, no scorch marks from flame. Light enters instead through reflection, pale moonlight filtered through narrow stone veins, mineral flecks catching and releasing a soft glow. The walls breathe faintly with moisture, and every sound feels absorbed, as if the corridor itself is listening. Beneath the silence, footsteps become thoughts, and thoughts begin to drift. Some believe this passage was designed to quiet the mind before arrival, a place where the weight of the outer world could fall away, grain by grain. The deeper one walks, the less the surface matters. Names loosen, dates dissolve, even intention grows soft, like sand slipping through open fingers. At the end of the passage, the chamber waits. It is not broken. It is not looted. It is not scarred by violence or collapse. Instead, it is finished, complete, in a way that feels deliberate, almost ceremonial. The floor stones are fitted with patient care. The ceiling arches in a calm, measured curve. Nothing is excessive. Nothing is missing. Abandonment here does not feel like loss. It feels like conclusion. The walls are marked, but not with writing meant to be read. Instead, they bear carvings that resemble time made visible, spirals that never fully close, lines that pause before meeting, intervals carved with intention, yet left without numbers. No beginning, no end, only movement suspended. Where memory fades, meaning deepens. It is said that in certain ancient traditions, time was not thought of as a river, but as a fabric, something that could be folded, layered, even set aside. Days could be gathered, moments could be wrapped in silence, and knowledge, when left unspoken, was believed to mature, like fruit ripening in darkness. This chamber, some believe, was not a vault of fear, but a sanctuary of trust. There are no locks here, no traps, no warnings etched in sharp relief. Instead, there is an overwhelming sense of confidence, faith that what was placed within this space would not be taken, because it was not yet ready to be known. Legends speak of watchers who once tended places like this, not guards with weapons, but keepers of rhythm and restraint. They understood that some truths arrive too early if forced into the light. That revelation, like sleep, must come uninvited. Marked by the moon, these watchers are said to have observed the sky and the stone together, aligning chambers with celestial breath. When the time came, and no one knows how they knew, they stepped away. Not in panic, not in exile, but willingly. No bones were left behind, no final message carved into the wall. Only the chamber, intact, and the door, sealed with care. As if the act of leaving was itself the final ritual. The sadness that settles here is not sharp. It is gentle, reverent. The kind of melancholy felt when standing beside something that has fulfilled its purpose perfectly, even if that purpose now escapes us. It is the sorrow of unanswered patience, not failure. Some believe the future meant to return here never did, that the world turned its attention elsewhere, toward louder knowledge, quicker truths, that the quiet disciplines required to approach such a chamber were slowly forgotten. And so the door remained. Dust gathered evenly, air learned new stillness. Time, finding no resistance, flowed around the stone instead of through it. If you listen closely, it is said you can hear breath echo faintly within the chamber. Not the breath of people, but of the place itself. A slow inhalation held across centuries. A pause that has not yet exhaled. Perhaps the door was never meant to be opened again. Perhaps it was meant to live on only as an impression, softened by distance imperfectly recalled. A memory felt rather than understood. A threshold that exists now, not in the earth, but in the mind, where sleep and forgetting gently meet. And so we leave it as it was found, not disturbed, not resolved. The stone remains cool. The spirals continue their quiet turning. And somewhere beneath the surface of time, a moment still waits, folded carefully into silence. It is said that there are places where time slows its steps, unsure of whether it is welcome. In forgotten corners of the earth, beneath layers of soil and silence, there exists a stone room untouched by erosion. Its surfaces are uncracked, its edges remain patient. Dust gathers, yet never wounds it. Moisture drifts nearby, yet never stains it. The chamber stands as it was first shaped, as though the years passed and around it in a wide and careful circle. The opening image is stillness. No wind sighs through its corners. No root dares to press against its walls. Even darkness behaves gently here, settling without weight. Time seems to move around this room, never through it, as if some unspoken agreement was made long ago. Whispers tell us this room was not built to endure through force, but through intention. Stone by stone it was shaped not as a fortress against decay, but as a pause within the world, a held breath, a moment agreed upon by history itself to remain unchanged. Some believe the builders understood something we have forgotten, that time is not always an enemy to resist, but a presence that can be negotiated with, if approached in silence. Beneath the silence, the air feels heavy with memory. Not memory as story, but memory as atmosphere, as if conversations once spoken here never fully left. Words dissolved into the stone, becoming echoes without sound. The chamber seems to listen still, holding what it was given without judgment or release. The walls are marked, yet not inscribed in any language meant to be read aloud. Symbols curve across the stone in slow spirals. Lines form cycles without beginnings. Moons are carved without nights. Patterns repeat, yet never quite return to where they began. They suggest movement without arrival, continuity without change. Where memory fades, meaning lingers. It is said that many ancient cultures believed certain spaces could be tuned like instruments, that rooms, like minds, could be shaped to hold stillness. In desert kingdoms, stories speak of sanctuaries built not for worship, but for waiting. In mountain monasteries, chambers were carved deep into rock, where monks would sit without thought, allowing years to pass like clouds outside a window. Across oceans and eras, the belief appears again and again. That emptiness, when preserved, becomes sacred. This stone room seems to belong to that forgotten lineage, a place designed not to store objects, but to shelter absence itself. Nothing was placed at its center. Nothing was removed. The preservation of nothing appears to have been the purpose all along. As the exploration deepens, a contradiction begins to surface like a quiet ache. The civilizations rumored to have shaped such chambers were often impermanent by nature. They built with wood and clay. They traveled with seasons. They allowed cities to dissolve back into dust without resistance. And yet, here stands a room meant to remain unchanged. A still point created by people who otherwise embraced impermanence. Why preserve emptiness so carefully? Some believe this room was never meant to be used in the where other spaces are. It was not a dwelling, not a tomb, not a treasury. Instead, it was a reminder, a single unmoving witness left behind to observe the passage of everything else. Marked by the moon, the carvings hint at cycles beyond human scale. They speak of time measured not in years, but in returns. Of stars that circle slowly back to familiar positions, of tides that withdraw and come again, of breath itself. The room does not deny change. It simply refuses to participate. Standing within it, one senses a strange humility, as if the stone has accepted its role without complaint. The room does not demand attention. It does not declare significance. It simply remains. And yet, that remaining carries a quiet sorrow. As centuries pass, the room outlives its builders, outlives the language that shaped its symbols, outlives the rituals that once approached it with care. It waits as generations forget what it was for until eventually, even forgetting feels too loud to enter. The emotional tone shifts here, from wonder into gentle sadness. Loneliness seeps into the stone, not as abandonment, but as patience stretched thin. The room continues to fulfill its purpose long after anyone remembers what that purpose was. It stands as proof that endurance does not always bring meaning closer. Sometimes it carries meaning farther away. Some believe time itself learned to avoid this place, not out of fear, but respect. The way one avoids interrupting someone deep in sleep. The way footsteps soften near a place of rest. Time passes nearby, marking seasons on the land above, etching valleys and wearing mountains thin. But here, beneath the surface, it moves differently, carefully, almost apologetically. Dust settles, but never thickly. Shadows shift, but never deepen. Silence remains intact. Perhaps this room was not built to hold anything at all, but to teach restraint, to remind those who found it that not everything must be altered to be understood, that some truths reveal themselves only when left untouched. As sleep approaches, the chamber offers no answers, only a feeling, a subtle ache, like remembering a name just beyond reach. The sense that something important was preserved perfectly, and in doing so became unreachable. The idea that time itself recognized the sanctity of this room and chose, quietly, to leave it alone. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the room was never meant to be filled, nor its mystery solved. Perhaps its greatest gift was its refusal to pass, to change, to conclude. And so it remains, still, uncracked, patient, waiting without expectation as the world continues elsewhere. It is said that before the world learned how to ask, something was gently placed down. In forgotten corners of the earth, far from roads and names, there is a chamber where the floor is bare stone and the air carries no urgency. At its center rests an offering, small, quiet, almost easy to overlook. It is not gold, not a blade, not a crown shaped for memory. It is something simpler, something whose meaning is not immediately clear. As if clarity itself was deliberately withheld, beneath the silence the stone seems to wait. No inscription explains what lies there. No warning guards it. The offering was not hidden in fear, but laid down with care. It rests as one might rest a sleeping chit, without spectacle, without witnesses, trusting that time itself will keep watch. Whispers tell us this was done during an age when restraint was sacred. Long before the world demanded answers, there were those who believed that knowledge, like fire, could warm or destroy depending on how it was carried. They understood that some truths ripen slowly, and that revealing them too soon could fracture the sky of understanding, scattering meaning beyond repair. And so they chose to wait. The chamber that holds the offering was not built for the present moment. Its proportions feel intentional, yet unfinished in spirit, as if designed for a consciousness not yet awake. The stone walls do not echo loudly. Sound dissolves here, softening footsteps, quieting breath. Even thought feels slower inside this space, as though the room itself encourages patience. Where memory fades, intention remains. Some believe this chamber was part of a final ceremony, not one marked by fire or proclamation, but by stillness. Soft echoes linger in the stone, chants barely remembered, the shuffle of feet moving with purpose, yet without haste. No crowd gathered, no record was made, only a small group, perhaps fewer than history would ever notice, standing together in agreement. The act was simple, to lay something down and step away. In ancient traditions scattered across deserts, mountains, and coastlines, there are stories of truths withheld out of compassion. Scrolls sealed not to hoard power, but to protect balance. Names erased so they could not be misused. Songs silenced until the ears of the world were ready to hear without fear. Marked by the moon, these stories often speak of watchers, those who observe the slow unfolding of human awareness. They believe that revelation must meet readiness, or else collapse into noise. That understanding forced into an unprepared age becomes distortion. The offering in this chamber belongs to that lineage. It does not announce itself as important. It does not glow or demand attention. Its power, if it has any, lies in its quiet refusal to be interpreted too soon. It waits without impatience, trusting that if the world ever becomes ready, it will return not with hunger, but with humility. As the narrative drifts backward, we sense the emotional weight of this decision. To choose silence over legacy is no small act. Those who laid the offering down knew they might never be remembered. Their restraint would erase them from songs, from chronicles, from lineage. History would move forward unaware of what had been spared or delayed. And yet, compassion guided their hands. The emotional journey softens here, turning toward tenderness. We begin to feel not frustration at the unknown, but empathy for those who carried the burden of knowing and chose to release it. They trusted future generations more than they trusted themselves. They believed wisdom was not possession, but timing. Beneath the silence, dust begins to gather. Not suddenly, not carelessly. Year after year, dust settles evenly across the stone floor, across the offering itself. The chamber remains intact. No flood intrudes. No root breaks through. Time moves gently here, as if aware it is passing over something unfinished. The unanswered question lingers like a held breath. Was the world truly not ready? Or did it simply forget to return? Perhaps the ages grew louder. Perhaps speed replaced patience. Perhaps the discipline required to approach such a chamber, to listen without demanding, was lost along the way. The offering waits regardless, unchanged by disappointment, unmarked by blame. It is said that some truths do not fade when ignored. They simply sleep. As sleep approaches, the chamber offers no revelation. Only the image of dust settling softly, evenly, year after year. The offering remains, not abandoned, but held in trust by stone and silence. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in waking hours. Perhaps it waits for those who arrive quietly, without expectation, guided not by hunger for answers, but by readiness to listen. Some voices only echo when we are ready to hear them. And so the chamber rests. The offering remains. And the world continues elsewhere, unaware of what was laid down in patience, waiting still. It is said there are hours in the life of the world that were never permitted to complete themselves. In forgotten corners of the earth, where stone remembers more than people do, there is a chamber sealed at twilight. Not night, not day. A moment balanced carefully between the two, like a breath held just before sleep. The entrance is narrow, framed by weathered stone that still carries the warmth of the last sun and the cool promise of the coming dark. The opening question drifts gently through the silence. Can a moment be preserved forever? No clock hangs on these walls. No gears turn beneath the floor. And yet the feeling of time is unmistakable here. Not flowing, not advancing, but hovering. The hour does not tick. It waits. Whispers tell us this chamber was closed during an unfinished moment, when the light outside hesitated, unsure whether to rise or fade. Twilight lingered longer than it should have, and in that lingering something was gathered and set aside. Beneath the silence, the air feels thick with suspension. The chamber within is softly curved, its stone surfaces smooth and patient. Along the walls, carvings unfold like a paused procession. Figures etched in shallow relief stand with hands lifted, mid-gesture, palms neither offering nor receiving. Their faces are calm, unfinished, as though expression itself was interrupted. Above them, stars stretch across the ceiling, but not in familiar constellations. These stars are caught halfway through their paths, frozen between where they were and where they were meant to go. Marked by the moon, the carvings glow faintly when light touches them, revealing details only briefly before returning to shadow. Nothing here is abrupt. Everything feels carefully arrested. Some believe this place was shaped by those who understood time differently. Across ancient cultures, there are echoes of philosophies that refused the straight line. Time was not a road, but a cycle. Not an arrow, but a bowl. Something that could hold moments gently, allowing them to rest instead of pass. In desert traditions, Stories tell of priests who gathered hours the way others gathered water, cupping them carefully so they would not spill. In mountain sanctuaries, monks spoke of pauses so deep they could be stepped into, like pools of still air. This chamber appears to be one such pause. It was not meant to stop time entirely, only to keep 1 hour from completing itself. An unfinished moment, preserved not as defiance but as devotion. A belief that certain instants, once concluded, could never be reclaimed. As the listener drifts deeper, the contradiction emerges softly without accusation. History teaches that all things pass. Empires rise and fall. Stars burn out. Even stone yields eventually to wind and rain. And yet, this place resists passing, not with strength, but with gentleness. Time seems to approach the chamber, sense the stillness within, and move around it instead. Dust settles slowly, but never fully. Shadows shift, but never deepen. The hour inside remains intact, like a breath never released. Where memory fades, sensation remains. Standing within the chamber feels like standing inside anticipation. Not excitement, not fear, but the quiet expectancy that comes just before something changes. The world outside has already moved on. Seasons have turned. Languages have softened into echoes. But here, the moment remains undecided. Some believe the hour was sealed to protect it. Perhaps it was an hour of great beauty, too delicate to endure repetition. Perhaps it was an hour of great sorrow, too heavy to be allowed completion. Or perhaps it was simply an hour of choice, a turning point the world was not ready to finalize. The stone does not tell us which. The emotional arc shifts now, from curiosity into serene unease. There is comfort in this stillness, but also a subtle disquiet. To remain forever on the edge of completion is not rest, nor is it movement. It is suspension. And yet, the chamber does not feel trapped. It feels held. Beneath the silence, the listener may sense the presence of that hour, not as a memory, but as an atmosphere. A soft pressure in the chest, a slowing of thought, the same sensation felt when sleep begins to arrive. But the mind lingers, unwilling to let go completely. Perhaps that is the true purpose of this place. It is said that some hours exist not to be lived through, but to be dwelled within. Moments that teach patience by refusing conclusion. The hour here does not ask to be finished. It asks only to be acknowledged. As the chamber holds its breath, so too does the listener. The final reflection comes not as an answer, but as a feeling. The sense that this hour still exists, ongoing and intact, just beyond waking awareness. That it waits quietly, neither lost nor resolved, resting in a space where time learned how to pause. Perhaps it was never meant to end. Perhaps it still unfolds, softly, whenever we drift close enough to listen. It is said that some places were never meant to hold people, only what people could no longer carry. In forgotten corners of the earth, beneath layers of stone and softened time, there is a chamber defined not by what lies within it, but by what is missing. No bodies rest here, no scrolls remain bound in their places, no names announce themselves in neat lines of script. There is only absence, careful, deliberate, and complete. An emptiness shaped with intention, like a bowl carved to hold rain. The opening image is quiet and unsettling in its gentleness. The floor is smooth, worn not by footsteps but by waiting. The walls rise without inscription, yet feel attentive, as though they have been listening for a very long time. Beneath the silence, impressions linger. Not marks meant to be read, but traces meant to be felt. A shallow indentation where something once rested. A polished edge where a hand may have passed again and again. The chamber does not speak, but it remembers. And it remembers not for itself, but on behalf of those who could not. Whispers tell us that long ago, memory was not trusted solely to the human mind. In ages before ink was plentiful, and before stories were written down, many cultures believed remembrance was too sacred, too fragile, to be left inside flesh and breath alone. Minds wandered, voices faltered, generations ended, and so memory was given to stone, to earth, to places that did not age as quickly as people did. This chamber was one such place. The walls are described not as barriers, but as listeners. They curve inward slightly, shaping sound so that even the smallest whisper would be received and held. The floor bears subtle patterns, almost invisible, like ripples after water has gone still. These were not decorations, they were witnesses. Where memory fades, the chamber remains attentive. Mythic traditions across deserts, jungles, and mountains tell of rooms like this. Memory houses, remembrance halls, chambers of echo. In some stories, elders would enter such spaces and speak names aloud, knowing the stone would carry them forward when voices no longer could. In others, grief itself was brought here, set down gently, so it would not be forgotten nor carried endlessly. This chamber seems to belong to that lineage. It does not display its knowledge. It does not proclaim what it holds. Instead, it absorbs. It keeps. It waits. As the exploration deepens, a soft sorrow begins to surface. Names, once spoken with care, are no longer heard. Purposes that guided hands and hearts have blurred into indistinct shapes. The chamber remembers them still, but the world above has moved on. Memory, once entrusted, was never reclaimed. The emotional tone here is tender, almost maternal. The chamber feels like something old and loyal, continuing its task long after those it served have forgotten to return. There is no bitterness in its silence, only patience. Beneath the silence, the stone feels warm with held presence. Some believe that memory, when stored in place, becomes something different. Not narrative, but atmosphere. A weight in the air, a pressure behind the eyes. Standing within the chamber, one does not recall specific events, but feels them. Like a sadness without a story, or comfort without a face. Marked by the moon, faint celestial symbols appear only when light strikes the walls at certain angles. They are not maps or calendars, but reminders of cycles, remembering and forgetting, holding and releasing. They suggest that memory itself was once understood as a rhythm, not a record. And yet, the contradiction emerges quietly, without accusation. If memory was safely stored here, protected from decay, sheltered from forgetting, why was it never retrieved? Why did those who entrusted the chamber with their most precious remembrances never return to reclaim them? Perhaps the answer lies not in failure, but in transformation. Some believe that memory, once externalized, changed its role. It was no longer something to be possessed, but something to be honored from a distance. The chamber became a guardian rather than a container. To retrieve the memories would have been to burden the living again, Or perhaps the world simply forgot the path back. As centuries passed, languages shifted, landmarks eroded. The knowledge of how to approach such a place, with humility, with readiness, was lost. The chamber did not close itself. It did not hide. It simply remained where it was, waiting to be remembered in turn. The sadness deepens here, but never sharpens. It is the sadness of devotion without witness, of a promise kept by one side alone. The chamber continues to remember faithfully, even though no one asks it to anymore, even though the names it holds are no longer spoken, even in dreams. Dust settles evenly across the floor, but the impressions beneath remain. Silence thickens, but the listening does not stop. Perhaps this is the chamber's final purpose, to remind us, not of what was remembered, but of the act of remembering itself, to show that memory, when treated with reverence, outlives those who create it, and that forgetting is not always loss, but sometimes the price of moving forward. As sleep approaches, the chamber does not demand understanding. It offers only presence, a lingering stillness, a quiet vigilance, a sense that somewhere beneath the weight of time, something continues to remember us, even when we no longer remember ourselves. Perhaps it was never meant to be retrieved. Perhaps some memories are safest when they are no longer carried, only held, patiently, silently, by stone. And so the chamber remains, alone, yet attentive, fulfilling its duty without instruction, remembering without being asked. It is said that there came a time when the world decided to stop counting. In forgotten corners of the earth, beyond roads that no longer lead anywhere, there is a chamber where the walls are marked with lines that resemble dates. But when followed, they arrive at nothing. No first mark announces a beginning. No final mark claims an end. Only intervals remain, spaces between moments, gaps where certainty once lived. The opening image is quiet and unsettling in its calm. The stone is smooth, its surface neither eroded nor newly carved. The markings do not feel abandoned in haste. They feel completed, as if the act of stopping was itself the final intention. This is the place where the last calendar was laid down, not shattered, not erased, but gently put away. Beneath the silence, the chamber breathes without urgency. No sound echoes sharply here. The air carries no sense of waiting. Instead, there is the calm one feels when a long task has finally been finished and nothing more is required. The calendar no longer governs this space. Time is present, but unmeasured, like water resting in a still basin. Whispers tell us that there were cultures who believed counting the future was a burden too heavy to carry forever. In ancient philosophies scattered across deserts and high plateaus, the act of measuring time was once considered a responsibility, not a right. Calendars were sacred instruments, handled with care. They aligned harvests, rituals, migrations, and prayers. But they also shaped expectation. They told people not only when things would happen, but when they must. And some came to believe that knowing too much about what comes next steals gentleness from the present. So there were rituals of closure. Not endings marked by fire or decree, but ceremonies of release. The final calendar was not destroyed. It was thanked, honored, then set aside, like an elder whose guidance had been faithful, but whose task was complete. The chamber that holds it reflects this intention. Along the walls, Carved lines curve and pause. Some resemble lunar cycles interrupted mid-turn. Others suggest solar paths that fade before returning. The symbols feel unfinished only if one expects completion. If instead one listens, they feel resolved. Where memory fades, relief begins. The narrative flows slowly through the idea that ending the count was considered merciful. To stop numbering the days ahead was to loosen the grip of prediction. Without dates pressing forward, the future became something softer. Open, breathable, unclaimed. Beneath the silence, one senses a deep exhale. The people who practice this believe that time, once freed from constant measurement, could heal itself, that the world, no longer bound to forecasts and deadlines, would unfold more honestly. Seasons would arrive when ready. Lives would conclude when complete. Nothing would be rushed to meet a number. Emotionally, the listener is guided from curiosity into quiet relief. There is comfort in imagining a future not already divided into squares and lines, a future allowed to remain unknown. The chamber becomes a sanctuary of uncertainty, not fearful uncertainty, but gentle possibility. Marked by the moon, the stone markings glow faintly when light shifts across them. They do not tell you what day it is. They remind you only that time moves, whether or not it is named. Yet, as the calm settles, a contradiction lingers like a distant question. Without counting, how did they know when to return? If the calendar was laid down, if the markers were abandoned, what sign would call them back when the moment was right? Or perhaps return was never intended. Some believe the ritual of closure was final, that once the calendar was put away, no one was meant to retrieve it. The future was entrusted entirely to unfolding, not oversight. Others whisper that there were signs, subtle and unmeasured. Changes in the sky, a shift in wind, a feeling shared quietly across many hearts at once. The kind of knowing that cannot be written down. The chamber offers no answer. It holds only the feeling of release, preserved like a scent in stone. Dust settles here not as neglect, but as completion. Each grain rests without needing to mark a moment. As sleep approaches, the image softens further. Time here does not march. It drifts. Perhaps that was the greatest gift of all. The calendar was not lost. It was forgiven. And in being put away, it allowed the future to arrive without pressure. Like sleep itself, coming not because it was scheduled, but because the body was ready. Some voices only echo when we stop listening for them. And so the chamber remains, quiet and unmarked by urgency. The lines on its walls lead nowhere, and everywhere. Time continues, uncounted, unfolding gently, just beyond the reach of measurement. It is said that there are truths so heavy they bend the breath before they ever reach the mouth. In forgotten corners of the earth, where stone cools the voice and light learns restraint, there is a chamber shaped not to reveal, but to withhold. The opening question arrives quietly, almost shyly, as if afraid of being overheard. What truth is too heavy to speak? The chamber does not answer, it listens. The invitation begins at a threshold cut low into the rock, half buried by dust and shadow. No inscription greets the visitor. No warning turns them away. Only silence stands there, calm and unguarded, like a choice that has already been made. The air beyond the entrance is still, not stale, as if it has been waiting without impatience. Beneath the silence, the stone seems warm with intention. This chamber was not created by accident, nor abandoned in haste. It bears the marks of restraint everywhere. Along the walls, scripts trail off mid-line. Symbols are half-carved, their edges softened, unfinished by design. Star maps climb partway across the ceiling and then stop, as if the sky itself was asked to pause. Whispers tell us these are not ruins of failure, but monuments to refusal. In ancient spiritual traditions scattered across deserts, forests, and high plateaus, silence was not the absence of wisdom, but its highest form. Words were considered blunt instruments, capable of wounding what they tried to hold. To speak too soon was to fracture meaning. To name something prematurely was to strip it of depth. And so, sometimes, the most sacred act was to stop. This chamber is treated not as a vault, but as a vow. The near revelations linger here like mist. You can sense them without seeing them. A thought just about to complete itself, a pattern that almost resolves. The stone holds these moments delicately, as if afraid that completion would make them smaller. Beneath the silence, one can almost hear the echo of voices that chose not to continue. The narrative drifts gently into the idea of collective restraint. This was not the decision of one hand or one mind, but many, gathered together in quiet agreement. They came close enough to glimpse the shape of something vast. And then, together, they stepped back, not out of fear, out of care. Some believe the knowledge they approached carried consequences beyond comprehension. Not destruction, but imbalance. The kind of knowing that would tilt the inner world, making it difficult to return to ordinary life. Others whisper that the truth itself asked not to be spoken yet, that it required a listener different from those who stood there. Marked by the moon, the chamber glows faintly when nightlight filters through hidden stone veins. In that glow, the unfinished symbols seem almost complete, but never fully so. They breathe in the half-light, alive but unclaimed. The emotional arc here is deeply calming. There is sorrow, yes, but it is gentle, without regret. The sorrow of restraint is quieter than the sorrow of loss. It does not ache. It hums, like a lullaby unfinished, yet still soothing. The chamber carries the weight of a collective decision to stop just short of knowing, to live with the question rather than consume the answer. This choice did not come easily. To turn away from revelation requires strength of a rare kind. It asks for humility, patience, and trust. Trust that the future will arrive when ready, without being forced. Beneath the silence, the stone bears witness to that trust. Dust settles slowly across the floor, but the unfinished carvings remain sharp. Time passes, but does not intrude. Even erosion seems hesitant here, as if aware that to erase these marks would be to complete them in another way. Where memory fades, reverence remains. The chamber does not mourn the words that were never spoken. It honors them by holding space. It allows the truth to exist without demand, without audience. It breathes softly beneath stone, intact and undiminished by exposure. As generations pass, the knowledge of this place thins. Paths are forgotten, names dissolve. But the silence does not weaken. It does not require remembrance to persist. Its power lies in its refusal to insist. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And perhaps that readiness has not yet arrived. The final reflection settles like dusk. Some knowledge survives best as silence. Not buried, not destroyed, but resting, breathing, waiting. The chamber continues its vigil without impatience, without expectation. It does not hope to be opened. It does not fear discovery. It simply remains. A sanctuary of restraint, a monument to humility, a reminder that not all truths are meant to be spoken. Some are meant to be kept whole. Perhaps it was never meant to be revealed. Perhaps the silence itself was the revelation. And as sleep approaches, the chamber fades gently from view, leaving behind not an answer, but a stillness, soft, protective, and complete. It is said that even the most vigilant eyes must one day close. In forgotten corners of the earth, beyond ridgelines softened by wind and valleys filled with mist, there is a chamber where nothing is broken and nothing is hurried. The opening image is gentle, almost tender. Cloaks lie folded with care along a stone bench, their fabric turned to dust-soft impressions. Lamps rest nearby, their wicks unburned, their flames long extinguished. Not blown out in alarm, but lowered patiently, as one might dim a light before sleep. This is the place where watchers finally slept. Beneath the silence, the chamber feels complete, not abandoned, not sealed in panic. The air carries the calm of a duty fulfilled. Even the shadows seem to rest here, no longer stretching or recoiling, but settling into stillness. Whispers tell us that long ago, there were guardians whose task was not to protect borders or treasures, but to keep watch over time itself. These watchers did not rule. They did not intervene. They observed. They listened. They stood at thresholds between moments, ensuring that seasons unfolded as they should, that knowledge ripened slowly, that endings arrived only when beginnings had been fully lived. Across cultures and eras, myths speak of such figures. In mountain monasteries, stories tell of silent sentinels who watched the stars each night, not to predict the future, but to notice when the rhythm of the sky changed. In desert sanctuaries, guardian counted nothing at all, trusting instead in balance felt rather than measured. This chamber is said to be their final resting place. The stone walls are smooth, worn not by neglect, but by reverent use. Along them are carved symbols of watchfulness. Open eyes without pupils, spirals that never quite close, stars etched with careful distance between them. These marks do not command attention. They wait for it. Where memory fades, vigilance remains. The narrative drifts slowly through the idea that these watchers knew when their era had ended. No signal summoned them. No catastrophe forced their retreat. They simply understood, perhaps through the same quiet knowing that guided their watch. And so they stepped aside. Their rest was not a surrender but a transition. Lamps were extinguished one by one, each flame lowered with gratitude. Cloaks were folded, not discarded. Nothing was taken away. Nothing was destroyed. The watchers did not vanish. They rested. The emotional journey moves from reverence into quiet gratitude. There is comfort in imagining guardians who knew when to let go, who trusted the world enough to stop watching it. Their sleep feels earned, not imposed. A gentle release after ages of attention. Beneath the silence, the chamber holds a question that never demands an answer. If the watchers slept, who was meant to wake them? The contradiction arises softly like a ripple across still water. In other stories, Guardians are roused when danger returns, summoned by ritual or need. But here, no such mechanism is visible. No bell, no inscription promising return. Perhaps waking them was never intended. Some believe their sleep itself became the final protection. That by resting, they sealed their watch into the stone, embedding vigilance into the place itself. The chamber listens now, even without living eyes. The walls remember what the watchers once noticed. The floor holds the weight of their presence. Marked by the moon, faint celestial light filters through cracks high above, tracing slow paths across the stone. It touches the folded cloaks, the quiet lamps, the carved symbols. Nothing stirs. Everything remains. The chamber does not mourn their absence. It honors their rest. As centuries pass, the world above changes. Kingdoms rise and fall. Knowledge spreads and fractures. Yet here the watchers remain asleep, undisturbed. No hand reaches to wake them. No voice dares to call their names. And perhaps that is as it should be. The chapter settles into its final reflection gently. Some duties are completed not by action, but by release. Some guardians protect best by stepping away. Their silence becomes a boundary. Their rest becomes a seal. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Perhaps the watchers sleep not to be awakened, but to remind the world that vigilance without rest becomes blindness. As sleep approaches, the chamber fades softly from view. The cloaks remain folded. The lamps remain dark. The watchers rest, and in their rest, the world is quietly, gently held. It is said there are places where even time lowers its voice. In forgotten corners of the earth, far from paths that expect to be followed, there is a room where decay seems to have chosen another direction. The opening image is not dramatic, but deeply unsettling in its calm. Stone rests, as stone has always rested. Dust lies lightly, never thick enough to suggest neglect. Cracks that should have appeared long ago simply did not. The air feels undisturbed, as if it has never learned how to move. Beneath the silence, the chamber stands complete. This is the room that time learned to avoid. No inscription announces its purpose. No barrier guards its entrance. And yet something unseen has held centuries at bay. Moss does not climb its walls. Roots do not test its patience. Water does not seep through its joints. The room is not frozen. It is respected. Whispers tell us that long ago, people believed time could be negotiated with. Not commanded, not conquered, but approached carefully through ritual and humility. In certain ancient traditions, there were places declared exempt from change, not as acts of arrogance, but as agreements. Sanctuaries where time would pass around rather than through, in exchange for reverence. This chamber bears the signs of such an understanding. The stone is smooth, worn only by the gentlest touch. Carvings circle the walls in spirals that never close, echoing motion without destination. Star-marked symbols appear faintly when light strikes at certain angles, then vanish again. The room does not reveal itself all at once. It invites patience. Where memory fades or deepens, the narrative drifts through cultural echoes of places untouched by age. Temples that did not crumble, gates that did not rust, halls that outlived the cities built around them. In myths, these places were not immortal, but paused, held in a kind of sacred suspension. Some believed these rooms were necessary. that without a still point, the world would forget what permanence felt like, that everything changing all at once would become unbearable. So they created spaces where change was asked to wait. Beneath the silence, one senses a presence. Not a guardian, not a spirit, but an understanding. Time approaches this room and seems to hesitate. Perhaps it remembers an agreement made long ago. Perhaps it senses something it does not wish to disturb. The emotional arc drifts gently into awe. Standing at the threshold of such a place, the listener may feel small, not in fear, but in humility. This room does not boast its exemption. It does not challenge the passing years. It simply exists unchanged, like a held note in a long song. And yet, a contradiction remains unresolved. Was time barred from this place? Or did it agree to stay away? Some stories suggest ritual boundaries, carefully spoken words, precise alignments with stars, offerings laid down not to appease, but to acknowledge. Time was not tricked or trapped. It was asked politely, and it listened. Other whispers suggest something deeper. That time itself recognized the necessity of such rooms, that it chose to spare certain places so that memory could have an anchor, a reference point untouched by erosion. The chamber does not answer. It stands quietly, unvisited, yet complete. Dust settles lightly across the floor, but never enough to signal abandonment. Light enters softly, never harsh. The room feels finished, as if it has already lived its entire lifespan and decided to remain. As the narrative softens, awe gives way to acceptance. Perhaps it does not matter whether time was buried or invited. What matters is that the room exists, and that it has endured without demanding explanation. Its presence alone is the message. Some things survive not because they resist change, but because they are allowed to rest. As sleep approaches, the chamber remains where it has always been. Time flows elsewhere. Years pass beyond its walls. But here, beneath the silence, the room continues, complete, untouched, and quietly avoided by the passing years. Perhaps it was never meant to be entered again. Perhaps it exists only to remind the world that even time can choose to be gentle. And so the room stands, unvisited, unclaimed, still. It is said that every story, if listened to long enough, eventually learns how to fall silent. In forgotten corners of the earth, the final chamber waits in near darkness. There is no threshold marked by warning or wonder now, no sense of arrival. Only stone and breath, sharing the same slow rhythm. The light is so faint, it feels remembered rather than seen, as if illumination itself has grown tired of insisting. This is not a place to be understood. This is a place to sit beside beneath the silence. The chamber no longer presents itself as a mystery. It does not ask questions. It does not offer symbols to interpret or markings to trace. All the careful patterns once noticed here, the spirals, the pauses, the uncounted intervals, have softened into atmosphere. They are still present, but no longer separate from the air. The opening image is simple. Stillness that does not need explanation. Stone rests against stone. Dust lies evenly without urgency. The chamber feels neither abandoned nor occupied. It feels complete in the quiet way a long breath feels complete when it finally leaves the body. Where memory fades, presence remains. This place has been visited before in fragments, through doors sealed in trust, through hours that refuse to end, through silence chosen over revelation. But now, those threads loosen. They no longer point backward or forward. They dissolve into a single sensation. The feeling of something ending without loss. The narrative no longer explores. It listens. Some believe this is what remains when nothing is asked to continue, when no one demands answers, when time is not urged forward and meaning is not pressed to reveal itself. The chamber becomes less a location and more a state of being, one that exists beyond effort. Beneath the silence, even curiosity grows gentle. Questions that once stirred now rest, not because they were answered, but because they no longer need to be carried. The weight of wondering slips away, replaced by a calm acceptance that some things do not conclude. They simply settle. The stone walls do not reflect thought anymore. They absorb it, softening edges, smoothing urgency. The chamber holds the listener, the night holds the body before sleep. Not with force, but with permission. Marked by the moon, faint light drifts across the floor in slow arcs, then disappears again. The motion is so subtle it feels optional, as if the light itself might choose to stop at any moment and remain where it is. Time here does not move. It rests. The emotional journey now becomes one of release. All that came before, the watchers, the calendars, the chambers of memory, feel distant but not gone. They have folded into this moment, like story that no longer need to be told because their meaning has already been absorbed. The listener senses not an ending, but a laying down. Curiosity dissolves into rest. The contradiction that once demanded attention. Was time stopped? Was it stored? Was it avoided? No longer matters. The question itself grows quiet, losing its sharpness, like a sound fading into the distance. Perhaps time was never lost here. Perhaps it was simply laid down gently, as one lays down a heavy cloak at the end of a long vigil. Not discarded, not forgotten, just placed aside, with care. Beneath the silence, the chamber feels almost tender. It does not guard anything anymore. It does not remember on command. It does not wait for return. It exists without expectation, which may be its most sacred state. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And now, there are no voices left, only the echo itself, softened until it becomes indistinguishable from the air. The final reflection does not arrive as a thought, but as a sensation, a loosening in the chest, a sense that nothing more is required. The world outside continues, of course. Storms will pass, stars will turn, names will rise and fade. But here, none of that asks for attention. The chamber does not resist change. It simply does not participate. Perhaps it was never meant to be found again. Perhaps it exists only in the moment when wakefulness loosens its grip and the mind begins to drift. When time becomes less like a line and more like a sea, carrying fragments gently without direction. As sleep approaches, the chamber fades not into darkness, but into softness. Stone, breath, and silence blend together until they are no longer separate. What remains when nothing is asked to continue is not emptiness, it is rest. And so the chamber remains, unclaimed, unresolved, complete. Time was not lost here. It was laid down, gently, to be dreamed rather than known.